You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel, and as you can see, Daryl's not on yet, so hopefully he... Oh, here he comes. All right. What's going on? We're all good. We're live here. And as you can see, Daryl's just joining us on the show now. I'll give him a few minutes to actually get started. So today, we actually have a really cool show because we finally get to talk about Heir to the Empire. That's right. That's a movie that we have been promising would hopefully come out. And now it looks like it's possible. It's not confirmed. I have to point that out. It is possible. So, you know as well as I do that this is something that we've been talking about since George Lucas sold Disney or Lucasfilm to Disney, right? Like it's basically one of the things that everybody thought was going to happen way back when the whole thing was sold, and it's like, oh great, they promised episodes 7, 8, and 9, which means we must be getting Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command, and then they threw us a little bit of a curveball because first Lucas said, no, I got my own treatments for it, and then they decided not to even use those, and then of course we've got The Force Awakens, Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker. Now it looks like there's actually a movie in the works of some sort that's supposed to tie together the whole Mandoverse. It's going to be like this big movie. And there's a lot of speculation that it could actually be some version of Heir to the Empire. We don't know how close that's going to actually mirror or not, but I don't know. What are you thinking?
Man, I mean, there's so much to unpack with this.
Yeah, there is.
I mean, I just have so many questions, but, in speculations, honestly. But, I mean, if they do this, of course, I'm excited. I mean, this is a really great story arc, actually, and Heir to the Empire really kicked it off back in the early 90s with this, because, Star Wars was kind of dead for a while. And so when Timothy Zahn came out with this novel, it was just kind of like, oh, fresh content. And it was actually really good. It gave us Thrawn, it gave us further adventures of Han, Luke, and Leia. And it was really well written. Now, I think, I've heard different versions. I've heard it's going to be live action. Then I heard there may be it may be an animated thing too, like almost like one of those DC, movies where they kind of just do a whole animation thing.
Right, which is something we had actually hoped for too. That was something that we long said that they should actually do. I mean, whether we're talking about this, Zahn's Thrawn trilogy or not, I mean, they can mine the old expanded universe, even the new canon books or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I think I would want to see this live action though.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do like a poll, like, how many people really want to see live action versus animation with this. But the question first question I have about all this is that, they're playing in this sandbox a lot of this whole post Return of the Jedi thing. We got Mandalorian, we got Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, so there's a lot of, stuff that's going on in this post Return of the Jedi. And Heir to the Empire takes place, 5 years after Return of the Jedi? So you're bumping up right up against...
I think it's closer than that.
Is it?
I think so. Because it's the Mandoverse that actually takes place 5 or 6 years after Return of the Jedi. Heir to the Empire, pretty much... I mean, I don't think it's immediately after, obviously.
Yeah,
but I mean, the whole thing... Well, Heir to the Empire itself actually started out with Luke having his last vision of Obi-Wan Kenobi, where Obi-Wan was basically like, look, this is going to be our last conversation. I can't really, hang on anymore. So you're going to be sort of on your own. So it opens with that. And then, because again, it's been 30 years or something since I've read it. So I'm not entirely sure. I remember all the events of it pretty much. but I'm not entirely sure
Well,
exactly, where the timeline fell.
it was 9 years after the Battle of Yavin.
Okay, so that would put it roughly, I guess it would be around the same time period, which of course, if it truly is like 5 or 6 years after Return of the Jedi, which it would almost have to be, because Thrawn was pretty much established by that point as a leader. There were still the remnants of the Empire, but I mean, it wasn't immediately after. But if that's the
Yeah.
case, then
And it makes sense with the Ahsoka thing too, because she's looking for Thrawn at this point in time, which is, she fits into that whole timeline as well. And that's what I mean. Like it seems to me that because of the gaffe that was the sequel trilogy, um, that, and we've always talked about them trying to reboot that whole thing or find different ways, and it seems to me is that they're trying to push a whole lot of content in this particular area with characters that we really like and care about, to the point that we almost will forget about the sequel trilogy. That's what it feels like to me.
well, when you basically look at the entire possibility, at least, of Heir to the Empire being made, and I mean, there, like you said, there's just a lot to unpack here, but the first thing that you have to look at is that it feels to me like Lucasfilm is going to try to use Disney Plus for its alternate Star Wars shows or something like that. So this is where this could easily live. The other possibility is because it does feature a lot of characteristics of the story that's happening in the Mandoverse right now, they could use either a direct take on Heir to the Empire. Well, I mean, the Ahsoka character hadn't been created yet, so they would have to alter a few things, but they could essentially lift at least most of the story, or at least base something on it, and maybe even use a loosely based Heir to the Empire adaptation into a film that could then tie together all the Mandoverse stuff. Because as we had said before, if they did a Marvel type of a thing, which it kind of seems is what they're doing, you have the Mandalorian show, you have the Book of Boba Fett, you have Ahsoka coming out, you have these individual, which would almost be like the Marvel standalone films, and it culminates into the Avengers, which, if they do this big Disney Plus live action extravaganza, they could actually tie all those series together in one film that concludes the story arc, and that could actually be some adaptation of Heir to the Empire, be it loose or exact, or at least exact as they can, because don't forget, they had introduced was it Mount Tantus or something like that in The Bad Batch, which was directly from Heir to the Empire. So it almost seems like they were setting that up.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's kind of hard to gauge, when this one that you brought up, The Bad Batch, because that's kind of been scrapped for a minute, and it's back on. I mean, you keep hearing all these different reports about even that show, and now this whole Heir to the Empire thing is kind of like popping up and gaining a lot of traction, to which a lot of Star Wars fans, would, like are chomping, excuse me, chomping at the bit for. But now you got to look at the characters. Like, okay, if we're dealing with Han, Luke, and Leia, on one hand, if you do it animated, then you could do young Mark Hamill. I mean, you could do Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford, doing the voices, and you just find someone who kind of sounds like Princess Leia, and there you go. Anthony Daniels is still around, so he can be 3PO again. You got, Chewie just does a bunch of growling anyway, so they've been doing him anyway in a lot of stuff. So, and you have, Ewan McGregor. He might can still, you can do something with his voice to kind of make him sound more like Alec Guinness, or
well, either that, or they could get that dude that did the old Obi-Wan on Rebels. Remember, that was like, I forgot who it was.
Yep.
It wasn't Matt
Yeah,
Reeves.
yep, that's right.
It was somebody though. It was somebody like that actually did the old Obi-Wan voice, and he nailed it.
Yeah, true, very true. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you could pull it off, and I think you can, if you want to use those characters, and now you're limitless as far as what they can do as far as action wise and things like that. Now, if you go live action with it, now you have to recast, a lot of people, because now you got to recast Princess Leia, young Mark Hamill, you got to recast. I mean, he already got Alden Ehrenreich, so maybe he'll come back and do Han again, like you mentioned before, or you know, and then so it's kind of an interesting thing that they're trying to propose here. But do you think that Heir to the Empire will take place? So you're saying that it's going to take place after, like, all the stuff that we've seen with Ahsoka. Like you said, it's said they're trying to do the whole Marvel thing, where
Well,
they
I
make
mean,
this like the bookend movie, almost kind of
yeah,
like the
we don't.
Avengers movie or something like
Seems like
that.
they would
But
have to, right? I mean, because obviously it's
I
after the Mandalorians, after Book of Boba Fett. They're making Ahsoka now. I mean, if this is happening, it would probably be to tie. And like you said, she's the one that mentions Thrawn. Thrawn is going to be introduced into live action through the Ahsoka series. Of that, I don't think anybody has any doubts. I
right,
mean, that's been all but confirmed anyway, right? So it
yeah, but
would stand to reason that if they were going to make an Heir to the Empire movie, they would introduce them,
yeah,
into live action and then tie it up.
yeah. My thing is, well, I guess if you're not going to show, because you can't have Mando or Din Djarin and Boba Fett running around.
Well, you
I mean, you
could,
can,
because
but
Boba Fett
I mean, you
was
can, but
running around actually in that trilogy. Don't
well,
remember if I think he appears in Heir to the Empire. I know he's in Dark Force Rising or Last Command, though.
yeah. I mean, like, yeah, okay, Boba, yeah, you can explain, but Din, like, I think you probably just have to leave him out of it, which is fine. I
Yeah,
mean,
you
he
wouldn't
doesn't need to be
necessarily
in
have to.
anything.
Like I said, if you remember because here's a couple of the possibilities that they could do with this thing. The first one is they could do a straight up adaptation of it.
Hmm.
And in that case, if you go live action, kind of like you alluded to, but you could do it because if you think about it, you could get Sebastian Stan or somebody as Luke. You can get
Hmm.
Alden Ehrenreich to play Han. You can get Donald Glover to do Lando. And then you would have to recast Princess Leia with somebody, but that's not. I mean, the only thing that kind of sucks about all this recasting, though, is that it's not like it took place before Episode 4. I think if you did something in between 3 and 4, or maybe like way
Hmm.
in the future, it would be a little bit better. But it's kind of like you see Harrison Ford as Han Solo in Return of the Jedi, and like 5 years later, he's Alden Ehrenreich. It's like, okay, that's weird, but for
Yeah.
familiarity's sake, you could do it. You could pull that off. And they could recast them because honestly, you'd be introducing Mara Jade, you'd be introducing Talon Card, you'd be introducing
Hmm.
um, Kip Duran, who's basically a Luke's Star Jedi pupil, and a couple other people like that. And then of course you got Thrawn. Now, what would be interesting is it would depend because in order to keep current canon, they would have to get Eli Vanto, who is sort of like from Heir to the Empire. You had Captain Paleon, and
Paleon,
Eli
right?
was sort of the Paleon of the new canon. He's kind of Thrawn's right hand guy. Came up with them and all that stuff. However, you could still make that work even in this whole new canon situation because you could still fit both Eli and Paleon into the story, and you wouldn't really run into too many canon problems. But
Well, what about um? But then there was like this dark.
well,
They
there's
had like this clone.
Joris Cabeoth. Yeah, he was the
Yeah, Joris Cabeath. Yeah, I couldn't pronounce his
he's
name
like
to save my life.
he's this like weird clone who
Like evil.
he's just some evil Jedi guy, I guess.
Yeah, that he wanted to take like the twins and make them
Mhm.
and train them in the ways of the Force, and but of course it's like the dark
Well,
side,
and
and
I
so
think he wanted
like
to turn Luke dark first. Because then
yeah,
eventually, I think they even had an Emperor clone in either Dark Force Rising or Last Command. It was one of the two. It was short-lived, though. But I could also be confusing the whole Dark Horse story. Like I said, it's been a minute since I read the books, but I remember most of the major things that happen in all the stories, particularly Heir to the Empire. And
Yeah, that's the one I remember the most.
sure, I mean it would be interesting in a way to go back and read them, but a lot of times, every time I'm tempted to do that, it's kind of like, well, yeah, but I could be reading a book that I haven't read yet. It's I very rarely
Yeah.
reread books unless it's something that I wanted to revisit for some weird reason. I think I've read the Halloween books more than once, but
Mm.
by and large, usually it's one and done for me with books. And especially because once they dumped the whole expanded universe and made the new canon, it's like, well, I don't know if I really want to go back and actually reread stuff. But the thing is, though, they could, if they do this live action, which it seems like they would almost have to if they're going to use it in conjunction with the Mandoverse. Because the Mandoverse is live action. And it would be kind of funky if they did a animated movie to tie that up. Now, as far as the whole thing about, what do you do about Din? What do you do about Ahsoka, even? You could squeeze them into the story. I mean, that's the cool thing about the whole Heir to the Empire thing, is that you could even almost do a straight adaptation, but you can swap out some characters, you can add stuff. Excuse me, you could do a variety of things where you're still taking the main storyline, but you're altering it in such a way that it would accommodate these characters without necessarily ruining the story. And of course, the other thing you could do is you could loosely adapt the story and fit in the new characters. In fact, if you remember, I don't remember which show it was that we were doing, but it was probably that whole The Future of Star Wars is Thrawn show that we did. I even said that if you really wanted to, you could remake the Thrawn trilogy with Rey, Poe, and Finn. Yeah, like with the actual new sequel trilogy characters. You could swap out Han, Luke, and Leia for them, remake it, and it wouldn't be as bumpy as you would think. So there is that.
Yeah, but I don't think they would. I think what they're trying to do is get as far away from that as possible. And it's like you said, Oscar Isaac, he has no desire really to come back to Star Wars unless he needs a new house. So then you have that, So with Heir to the Empire, because I know there was a couple of different story plots in there, and they're all good, but it was kind of like you had a bunch of different things kind of going on at one time. And I'm wondering, like, do you think that can all be put together in one movie?
Yeah, I think you could, because much like every book, you have a little bit of like more non-essential plot points. I mean, look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They had to really refashion those books. I mean, you had half of the Two Towers in Fellowship, and they omitted entire subplots from the thing, and they pared it down. It's way harder to make Lord of the Rings into a bunch of films than it would be this, because really there's really not too many plot points. I mean, it's no different really than a Star Wars film. That was the whole point. That's what Timothy Zahn was trying to do. He was trying to continue the Star Wars stuff in the vein of a Star Wars movie, which means you only have like 2 or 3 plots, like what they do in any Star Wars film. And so you had Luke rebuilding his Jedi temple on Yavin 4, and, the whole spirit of Exar Kun and all that stuff. And then you had Han and Leia trying to come to terms with rebuilding the New Republic. You had Thrawn, of course, coming up with his plan to pretty much overtake them. You had the subplot of Mara Jade, who was hunting down Luke Skywalker to get revenge for the Emperor.
Right.
And I mean, that was pretty much it.
But then, like I said, then you had like Jairus, like you said, Koboth, or
Cabaoth, but he was
Cabaoth,
basically, but he was part of Thrawn's plan, though. Thrawn had restarted the cloning facilities and all that stuff.
Yeah, and then you also had the whole thing with was it Jason? Well, the twins weren't born yet, I don't think, or were they? I'm trying to remember.
Well,
Jason Solo,
yeah,
because
Jason and Jaina might have been born during that book. And then
but see,
Anakin
then
Solo came later, and then Ben Skywalker came later still.
yeah, yeah. But see, then I was like, okay, well, what are you gonna do about the Kylo character? You see what I'm saying? Like now, how they would have to.
Well, because, and that's why I say you could still make it work, right? Because the Kylo Ren character actually is loosely based on Jason Solo.
Jason Solo, right?
Because Jason Solo became Darth Caedus, like further on, and he became a full-blown Sith Lord, which, didn't really sit too well with Luke. It was different because he did that a little bit during and then definitely after the Yuuzhan Vong thing. So, but still, I mean, you might have to shrink timelines a little bit. You would replace Jason with Kylo, obviously. The Jaina thing, that would have to go away. But again, it's like the plot points.
Like you said, it's like, I guess
the plot points of the kids just isn't that important, I mean, it's kind of like Kylo could pretty much be that for both of them. You could eventually, of course, have Mara and Luke have a kid, pretty much like, they did in the thing. But even if they didn't, it doesn't matter. Now, on the other hand, that's the live action part. The other side of that, which of course you mentioned earlier too, is that if they do this animated, then they can do a straight up adaptation.
Yeah.
And the problem, it's sort of like you were saying.
Minus the twins, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, and if they do that, it's kind of like you would almost have to do that, like kind of how Marvel does the whole what if thing and everything else. And that's where I think that sometimes Lucasfilm and Disney do not give the Star Wars fans enough credit, because their whole idea is, yeah, but if you start doing all this stuff, you'll lose the fans. Not lose them meaning they would go away, but lose them meaning they would be confused. And it's like, but if you look at all the Marvel stuff that they've been pumping out on Disney Plus, they're doing that for people who are really fans of the Marvel. They're not making this stuff for the casual fan. Especially when you look at the whole animated what if thing. What if Thanos had won? What if, what were some of the other ones? They were good too. And people would be confused. I mean, you could make a straight up adaptation of Heir to the Empire and say, hey, this is kind of in the old canon, this was the episode 7 that Timothy Zahn imagined, and we're just making an animated trilogy. And people would be all about it, because then it would give them, in essence, what they wanted, especially if, like you said, they actually got Hamill and Ford back to do the voices. That would be great. Now, if they did the live action thing, if they wanted to recast it, fine. They could easily lift the story and make it function perfectly well, and just say, okay, we're going to make this first Disney Plus live action film as something that will tie together the individual Mandoverse series that we've got. And as far as the plot goes, we'll just loosely base it on Heir to the Empire, because that featured Thrawn heavily, and you could do that. You can take some plot points from that. You can do the overall story and make it work okay. You could even bring in Mara Jade, she's trying to get revenge on Luke. All that works. All you'd have to do is make sure she was killed off by The Force Awakens.
Who would you have play Mara Jade?
Oh, we actually did this. It was a casting. Because I remember there were some rumors going around. I thought Brie Larson would be a good choice, except the problem is that she's, she's Captain Marvel. Not that that matters, but actually I think she's rumored to play somebody else in the Star Wars universe anyway.
Yeah, I think she's like an Imperial officer or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. She would actually be a good Rey Sloane. She would be a really good Rey Sloane. That's who I would cast her as. Mara Jade, though.
What about Scarlett Johansson?
Too obvious. Too I
on the nose.
the problem is that
Well, I
Mara
mean, it
Jade has
just
this Black Widow-ish type of. It's almost like she'd be playing the same character, you know.
yeah.
And I mean, you could make that work, but you know, the other thing that you'd have to do is I mean, I hate to say it, but she's almost at this point, she's getting to be a little too old to play that part too. She could still pull it off, but you know, the thing is that you have to look at the age too, because if you're going to do all that, you'd have to cast a younger Luke Skywalker. You know, you'd have to get somebody, kind of like in their late 20s. You know, because that's like a late 20s thing. You know, it'd be better if they were a natural redhead, I would say, although it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, between wigs or just die, you know.
Sure. I mean, it's tough. You know, it's a tough choice.
You know what? Ronda Rousey might not be bad.
You got to have somebody with acting chops, too. That's the problem. Mara Jade is not some just action lightweight. I mean, they have to be. That's why, I mean, the Scarlett Johansson thing would be good because she actually has the acting range to pull it off.
True.
So you would have to have somebody that's got serious acting chops because Mara Jade's not some action-y throwaway, you know, anybody could play her type character. I mean, she's quite complex, actually, and especially as time goes on.
Well, yeah.
You know, so you'd have to get somebody who's really, really kind of worth, you know. I'm trying to think of like all the actors that are in that age. I can never properly, you know, every single time it comes to stuff like that, I can never think of it. Like I'll see people, you know, and then there's a lot of, I mean, I hate to say it, but a lot of these actresses kind of blend together for me. Like you got Emily Blunt, you've got, Emma, what's her name?
See Lord of the Rings? I mean,
no.
not Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones?
No. It's like the same, there's like a bunch of like actresses that, you know, are in a lot of movies now. And it's kind of like the same group of actresses that you see in a lot of these more, they're mainstream movies, but they're more serious in drama.
Action.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't see them. I mean, you need someone who can have the dramatic range, but also can pull off like the fighting and all that type of stuff too.
Sure. You know, that's it. You would basically need somebody that can, and you know, you could train them. I mean, there's a lot of actresses, like look at Anne Hathaway when she played Catwoman, you know, she was one of those types of actresses, but it's kind of like, okay, and Scarlett Johansson actually just did an interview about a week ago where she was like, look, I'd never even set foot in a gym before I had to start training for Black Widow.
I know who'll be awesome. Young, has the acting chops for it, and knows how to fight. The chick who plays Tori from Cobra Kai. Just dye her hair red.
I mean, I hate to, this is going to sound terrible, but she's just not like
busty enough.
She's a little stocky in a way, you know? I mean, it's like
a little workout, like you said, a little workout can.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, you know,
make her a little shapely.
Plus, she's kind
of some of those rough. I mean, she's young; she can fight.
You'd have to have somebody
has a dramatic range.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, and then there's a lot of actresses too that you see on a lot of these shows. I can't believe I'm actually blanking on a lot of this stuff. That's what's really funny to me is the fact that, you know, because I mean, when you look at even this poster right now, granted, I mean, other than Jor's, Cabaoth, and Thrawn, it's pretty much the main characters. I don't see. Yeah. It's too bad Mara Jade wasn't pictured on there. What's funny is when you see her illustrated on a lot of these novels that she's been in, there's like a lot of actresses where you're like, oh, that looks exactly like whoever, you know, but I can't think of any of them right now. And that's what's so funny, you know, is that you need somebody. And I mean, who knows? Because a lot of times, even with some of the, like, remember when they first introduced Michael Keaton as Batman, and everybody's like, really? And it wasn't even so
Right.
much just the fact that he was a comedian, but when you really stopped and thought of his physical appearance in a lot of the comedies that he's done, you're like, I don't know, man. I just don't see Batman there. But then when you see him on screen, you're like, oh, well, okay. That works
He got a
out.
big rubber suit on. I mean, that kind of helps out.
Well, there's that, but then there's just also the fact
that's kind of how the way you feel about Pattinson too. It's like Batman too, because he's kind of small. He's only like 165 pounds.
Well,
But,
I had heard that he
outside of the
refused
suit,
to. He didn't even really want to work out too much for that movie. But I mean, he did get in enough shape, like when he did the one scene where he was kind of shirtless or something. It's like, okay, you can buy it at least, and that's true too. I mean, if they announced tomorrow that, I don't know, like Kate Winslet was going to be Mara Jade, you'd be like, well, oh, okay. I mean, she's a little too old at this point, I think, to play that part too. But the thing is that you could get somebody in shape to actually play the part. The important thing is, do they have the overall physicality that you would have to refine it, of course, through all the rigorous workouts and stuff. But I mean, do they have basically the proper physicality? Do they look somewhat like the character? Because the problem with Mara Jade, because a lot of people would actually argue, well, hey, isn't she a book character? Who cares? But a lot of people care. For one thing, there's the description of the character, right? And that's the problem you had with Tom Cruise's Jack Reacher. Movie fans in general were pretty cool with it, but the book fans all hated him. And the reason why they hated him was because he didn't look a thing like the way Jack Reacher was described. Now, the TV series, that Amazon Prime series it's on right now, that's who Jack Reacher is supposed to look like.
Well, they felt the same way about Daniel Craig as Bond.
Yeah. Right. And that's another important thing, too, because Bond, as everybody knows, was a book character at first. And that's, it's kind of like, well, who's close to that? The other thing that you have to look at besides that is the fact that, unlike a lot of these books, you do actually have quite a few illustrations of Mara Jade.
I was going to say the comics.
Well, there's
the comics.
There is the comics, that's true, but then you also have even the book covers. I mean, I know it's kind of lame, but I mean,
video games. I think she's in video games too.
Yeah, you might be right. I'm not sure she actually appears in a video game, but she could. But the point is, there's enough characters out
Source
there.
material.
Yeah, and that might actually be a good show, like kind of how we did. Who should play young Palpatine or who should play Thrawn? Like our top 5 choices or whatever. I mean, obviously not today because we can't think of anybody, but but top choices to to play. That would be one of our good little Monday shows that we can do. To
after our,
well,
maybe
obviously
there's nothing breaking that comes off after this Monday.
Yeah, that's the problem. Because just so everybody knows, yes, we're fully aware of the Obi-Wan trailer dropping a couple of days ago, and we've got that in the queue. That's good to go for Monday. So Monday's show, and I'll remind everybody at the end of the show, too. Monday, we are definitely going to do an Obi-Wan reaction trailer. The event is sitting lovingly on our YouTube channel as we speak. So you can go ahead to that event and click the set reminder button, and you'll be good to go to listen to us on Monday or watch us on Monday, and we'll actually be reacting, as usual, in the trailer. Because, like, right there, see that where this poster thing is right now? That's where the Obi-Wan trailer video will be on Monday. And, Voyager, of course, chats in and says, yay to the Obi-Wan reaction. Yeah, well, I mean, and I'm sure that people were probably watching us today, and possibly expecting it. And, I mean, I have to be honest, I thought about it. But the thing is this Heir to the Empire thing, it's kind of a big... I mean, when you drop something like that, the prospect of Heir to the Empire, something that everybody wanted to see. This is what everybody wanted for episode 7, by the way. For those who may not have been around, or maybe were into Star Wars or whatever,
or didn't read the book or anything,
or whatever. But back in 2012, when Lucasfilm was sold to Disney by George Lucas, everybody instantly was celebrating, thinking, finally, they're going to make episode 7. What would make the most sense? Make Heir to the Empire, because it's already been out for, at that point, it had been out for like 12 years or so. Actually, 22 years.
Yeah, I would say 20.
Yeah, 20 or 21. It actually came out in 91, so it would have been like 21 years at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So you've had the source material out forever, which, by the way, the entire expanded universe book collection was rooted in Zahn's Thrawn trilogy, and of course some of the other Zahn books that he came. That was the source material that everybody used for all their other stories. So the entire expanded universe is built on Heir to the Empire and its subsequent 2 books. So, the prospect that they might make anything out of this, because again, this is just rumor and speculation. Of course, it has the usual inside sources say.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that we learned is that if there's rumblings, now it could just be something in development, as anybody may or may not know, when any Hollywood studio says something is in development, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's being made. What it means is that they have the green light to develop an idea, and that they'll look at the idea. It doesn't even mean a script is there yet.
Right.
It just means that you have official permission from the studio to go and develop an idea and pitch it to us.
Make a pitch.
Yeah,
yep.
Pretty much. Right? So even if this is just in development, I would still say it's big news, because it means that it's on the table somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a weird thing for them to just say, and to be honest, it would make perfect sense. It would make sense for them to do this and tweak it a little bit. And then, of course, we could talk about that, as we have been, about how much they would tweak it, how they would tweak it, and everything to make it fit the current Mandoverse. But it could be done. And it could be done relatively easily, in my opinion anyway. But, we don't know. And that's the problem. So, yes, we're aware of the Obi-Wan trailer. Yes, we have seen it. Yes, we have thoughts on it. And you'll find all that out and be able to watch it. And we'll react to it on Monday.
This coming Monday.
This coming Monday.
So, this coming, not this, but
yeah, right, exactly. 48 hours from now. Actually, that'd be Sunday.
So,
for
the Heir to the Empire, how do you think that, because there's a lot of emotional weight in this, and although we did like Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo, do you think he'll be able to pull this type of performance off?
Oh, well, that's actually a point. So this brings me back to another point that I was going to make earlier, but once again, because there's just so much to unpack with this thing, it's like got off on a tangent before I was able to finish the point. And that is that, and of course, the other thing too is that the ever so slight delay that we get from, see, this is why I miss it when we were in the same studio.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we're going through the same system. We're looking at each other physically, and I can't wait to get back to that. I'm still working on our new studio space, so that will be forthcoming to where we will be in the same room once again, like we used to be. But one of the points that I was going to make earlier was the fact that I really think that Disney Plus is going to be the vehicle to continue things like Solo, a Star Wars story. So remember that was going to be a trilogy. And they were going to make Thrawn back, or not Thrawn, but Maul and all that stuff and everything else. Mm-hmm. They had a somewhat of a fleshed out idea of where they were going to go in the second and third Solo movies. It tanked, even though, of course, a Star Wars tank is crazy success for any other film, but nevertheless, it did not meet expectations from the investors, from the studios, or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, we did a whole show on that too when it came out and talked about why we thought that was. So if you guys are curious on really what our thoughts were about the whole Solo a Star Wars story, or why we think it actually failed, and did it really fail, if you look at it from what we'd like to say, a certain point of view, you can definitely go back and check that out. Of course, don't do that until you're done watching this. But the point is that they could use Disney Plus to make these maybe less popular stories, or maybe it could be alternate universe type stuff, right? Where they could actually go and adapt an expanded universe book, and from there just make the story, right? Because there is a large segment of Star Wars fans that really would love to see that stuff. And they could do that on Disney Plus because they're not necessarily doing it in a theatrical setting to where there's a lot of dollars on the line and everything else. You can do some of the less popular stuff, or maybe more hardcore fan-centric stuff on Disney Plus. And so I think that ultimately that's where you could see a home for something like Heir to the Empire and the subsequent 2 books. Of course, the question becomes, and we've touched on this a little bit this evening, but what did they do? Did they do a straight adaptation? Do they alter it, make it part of where they're going? Because here's the thing, and this is where we'll get some of your thoughts on this too here, is if they don't do a straight adaptation, does it really upset the fans? Because Heir to the Empire is a very beloved thing. As you pointed out earlier, they already kind of botched up the sequel trilogy in most fans' eyes. You go in and you start ruining or messing with Heir to the Empire, which is a very cherished piece of work. I don't know. You better make it good.
Yeah, in the words of in the words of Jack Nicholson and Batman, better be sure.
That's right.
And it's and that's the thing. I think that if you do Heir to the Empire, I mean, one, it'll be great. And like I said, it just depends on what they're really trying to do. I mean, I wish I really understood. I mean, in some ways, I don't even think they even understand all the way. But what Lucasfilm are like, what are they trying to do? Like, are they, because of course everybody knows, like, okay, the sequel trilogy was less than stellar. Okay, we get that, we know it. We're trying to move on. But it seems like, in some ways they're playing in this particular sandbox in this period of time. Because, like, why aren't they just making things that's post, Rey and her adventures? And, like, of course people could always ask, well, where's Rey? Where's, Finn and all them? But, one thing we did get out of that whole sequel trilogy is the Force lives in a lot of people. And then, it picks who it wants, so we can just be picking up, like, Rey could be off doing whatever, just like, Luke was in Mandalorian. So why are they spending so much time in this particular sandbox of prior to Force Awakens? And it seems like they're trying to either make the Force Awakens make sense, or they're trying to bury it. And it's more so like not necessarily reboot it or anything like that. I just think that they're trying to put so much content out there that it's like, okay, you get so absorbed in this stuff. And this is the stuff that we know that fans want to see. People want to see more Han, more Luke, more Leia. They want to see more of those stories because those are the characters that they fell in love with. And, that's why we're getting stuff like, of course, Obi-Wan and things like that. I think that that's just kind of interesting to me that they're kind of staying in this post Return of the Jedi era, like right out the gate. And even if they're doing the whole Marvel thing, like you said, where they're doing, all right, we got a couple of seasons of Mandalorian, we got one season of Boba Fett, we have a season of Ahsoka coming out, and then boom, we'll have Heir to the Empire, so to speak. Okay, and that's the bookend. And then you might do another season of Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka and whatever, and then boom, now you got Dark Force Rising, and then on it goes, kind of like you said,
Mm-hmm.
the Marvel formula. So, and you could do that definitely. Um, and yeah, I think people will get so absorbed in that, then people will kind of want to see, like, all right, well, what happens next? What happens, because then you could take the whole Ahsoka, depending on what you want to do, or what they decide to do with Ahsoka, and if they find Ezra, that could be its own thing where they go off and you follow their adventures, and we, like I said, we forget about Rey, Penn, and Poe.
Foe. Well, but you bring up a lot of good points in this, but here's to answer a lot of those questions that you put forth. One of the things that I think they're doing is, yes, I think that and that's what I always said. Why, I should say, it's what I always meant when I said they're more softly rebooting the sequel trilogy. They're not doing a hard reboot. It's really more like they're retconning it to a degree, and they're going to come out with this entire 10, 15 years of stories that are going to eventually somewhat alter the sequel trilogy in a way that even if people still don't like it, they'll be at peace with it because it'll make sense within the context of all this other story. Now, to go back to why are they mining this particular part, I've always said it's because this is really the most story-rich era in all of Star Wars. I mean, yes, you needed to establish a prequel trilogy. I mean, that was huge, right? And then there's a lot of stuff that can go on between 3 and 4. That's pretty big, too. And what I like in it, too, is Star Wars is almost like a tattoo that was basically drawn out, but it wasn't filled in yet. So, with the prequels and the sequel trilogy, or not the sequel trilogy, the original trilogy, you basically had a tattoo that was a detailed tattoo, but it was just the outline. It wasn't filled in.
Shaded, right.
Right. And then what happened was the sequel trilogy, you just add more stuff to that tattoo. The thing is, though, yeah, you need to fill it in. And that's what Rogue One is all about. That's what Solo is all about. That's what Rebels and the Clone Wars animated series. So it's really not so much that they're trying to not expand out and make even more stories. It's really more like, look, we haven't really filled in all the stories that we've already began. These stories aren't really concluded. We need to go in and fill them in. Now, I mean, if they started coming up with something that, happened in between particular scenes of a film, well, then I would say, all right, guys, maybe it's time to broaden your horizons a little bit. The other problem, too, is that, at least right now, and who knows, that could change 10, 20 years, who knows what people are going to think, but people don't have that same instant attachment to Finn, to Poe, to Rey that they had with Han, Luke, and Leia, or even Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Padme, all those people. Because if you think about it, there were a lot of new characters in the prequels. There's some, of course, everybody hated Jar Jar pretty much, but you have your fans of him too. And even and even when you look at stuff like the Clone Wars, there's a lot of new characters in the Clone Wars. In fact, if you look at a lot of these live action appearances we're getting in the current TV shows, everybody's Cad Bane, Ahsoka. I mean, most of them are coming from the Clone Wars. And to a degree, you can even include Boba Fett in there because his story is now being expanded. So there's a lot of things they can do, and especially the post-Return of the Jedi world. Now, the real question becomes, why didn't they just make the sequel trilogy in that era? That's where I really think, that's where I think they dropped the ball, because that's what Heir to the Empire does.
Oh, you talking about like with the original cast?
Yeah, like episode 7, 8, and 9, the sequel trilogy that we got. Why set it 30 years? Well, I mean, I guess they kind of had to do it because of the age of the actors. So, I mean, that sort of answers my own question.
That's what I was trying to figure out. Like, at first, I thought you were talking about why didn't they do it like in the 90s or something?
Well,
Or like,
yes, that's a big question that I've always had, is that if you're George Lucas, well, you also have to remember that Lucas's thing was really at the age that Mark Hamill was at the time that Episode 7 was made is really the age that Lucas wanted Mark Hamill to be in order to tell the story he wanted to tell. Because remember, a lot of The Force Awakens, although they didn't use his outlines at all, they did actually use some very basic things. Rey was actually a character called Kira, which, as we've said before, is where we think that they got the Solo character from.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically Luke training her, and he was a little dissolute. I mean, it didn't go down exactly as it went down in The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi, but it was that same idea. And so Mark Hamill, in order to play that part, unless you aged him up like they did with Palpatine back in Return of the Jedi, it really wouldn't have worked so well. You needed to wait till the actor aged. So Lucas didn't really want to tell that same story that you see in Heir to the Empire.
But do you also feel like, Heir to the Empire wasn't done because it wasn't a Lucas story?
Oh,
Because,
absolutely. That's exactly what
that's
it
the first
was.
thing. Yeah, because first things first, like that's what he is as a storyteller. Like, I mean, even with Star Wars, that was just his whole story, and we've often said it. He's better as a storyteller than a director at times. I mean, granted, he's done a magnificent job with Red Tails, but he created the story of Indiana Jones. He's really good at that, and so I think that for him to do a movie that's not based on him, it's kind of like, well, this is not what I got into film for.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
he got
he
into
wouldn't
film
have done
to do
it.
his own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, his
So I
whole
think
thing
that's
with
another big reason too.
Right. This whole thing with the expanded universe was like, look, I'm going to license it. You can write your stories, but they're not canon. That was actually the problem with the expanded universe, is that none of it was ever canon. Ever.
Yeah.
Lucas is like, anything I do, okay, that's canon.
Yeah, and I often wonder, like, if he felt like the expanded universe was better, because at the time you only had the original trilogy to really hold it up against, really. So you
For a while,
gotta
yeah.
kind of wonder, at that time, like when
For about
Heir
8
to the
years.
Empire, yeah, so it's kind of like you gotta wonder if, like, Lucas felt like fans appreciated or liked Timothy Zahn story more than his.
No, he didn't really care, because you have to remember, at that time anyway, he didn't even have a treatment for 7, 8, 9. I mean,
Well, no, I'm just saying, like,
he kind
I'm
of
saying,
did,
like,
and that's what Zahn based his thing on, in a way.
well, I mean, like the story of the original trilogy, like, okay, you got the original trilogy, and then you have Zahn's trilogy. I'm just saying, like, did he feel like there was too much competition between the two
No,
stories?
not at all.
Or,
Because there wasn't. Because Timothy Zahn's trilogy was a continuation of it.
well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I think,
And
I guess it's
nobody
almost like if
ever,
someone
because the expanded universe was never as popular as the original trilogy, ever.
and that's what I was going for. Like, because during that time, I mean, granted, like, that book came out, 91. So I was still too young to really know how the real fans, because at that point you guys were like adults at that point. So I'm still navigating through Star Wars at this point. Like, I'm picking up, books from the library and things like that. But you were there from day one. So you would get to see, and you guys were probably involved in those conversations as far as like, well, yeah, the expanded universe is really cool, but it still doesn't hold a foot candle to the original trilogy.
Well,
but
in a
it is
way,
really cool.
yes, in a way, no. We never had that attitude. See, that's the thing. Fans never compared the two as, oh, these are better stories than what Lucas was telling. It was really more like, okay, this is the good continuation of the stories Lucas was telling. There was a lot of things where we were all hoping that Lucas would eventually make movies based on some of these. Or if he didn't, the whole thing with him was just acknowledge him as canon. Now, what he eventually did, which was throwing the fans a bone, because here's the thing.
He would cherry pick from him.
He would cherry pick from him for the prequel trilogy, but even before that, by the time the prequel trilogy was made and you had 8 years of these stories coming out, The one thing that Lucas never anticipated, and neither did, their book divisions and all this other stuff. When they license these things out, they never expected it to be as popular as it was. I mean, the expanded universe became crazy popular among Star Wars fans. And that presented a problem for Lucas because his whole thing was he thought that he would have these, license these books out and people would enjoy them, and that's about it. It wouldn't be a thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that was my point where I was saying, like, did he feel threatened anyway, in the sense of like, okay, I didn't intend for this guy's stories to be, I didn't expect this guy's to be as popular as it is. And now it's kind of like, well, people want me to make these films, but I kind of want to make my own. And what I'm saying is, like, if let's just say he decided to make his own 7, 8, 9, like you said, he eventually came up with the treatments for them. But what if they weren't as good as the expanded universe? Then everybody
He didn't care.
Like,
he honestly didn't care. He said time and time again in the whole thing, Star Wars is his thing. Only his stuff counts. He could care less about the expanded universe. He was glad that fans enjoyed him. He certainly enjoyed the money he made from the licensing, but he really did not care one iota about it. Didn't interest him because he doesn't feel about Star Wars the way the fans do either. That's what everybody forgets. They're his creation and they're his sandbox, and he maintains control of them to the point where his whole thing is like, if the fans like it, great. But if they don't, I don't care as long as I like it.
I like it. Right.
I mean, he'll every once in a while try to consider it because he didn't expect this to become some cultural phenomenon either. And so with the expanded universe, he didn't really care about it at all. He never really read any of the books. He wasn't really interested. The only thing that he would do is he had to personally sign off on the stories because he didn't want them.
There were certain characters or something like that.
Well, it wasn't even that because they killed off Chewbacca. He didn't even care about that because in his mind, they didn't.
It's not canon.
Right.
Yeah, it's not canon. It doesn't exist.
But what he didn't want was he didn't want certain characters to do certain things or whatever. So he did have like certain rules or certain stories that he didn't want told and everything like that. Now what happened was because they did become so popular and so beloved that what Lucas ended up doing was he would take certain little characters or things out of the expanded universe and canonize them through the prequels. And so then what happened was when he started doing that, because certain things he would just turn on his ear. Like, remember that the whole origin of Boba Fett was completely different. So he nullified that, but at the same time, he brought in Quinlan Vos. There was a bunch of others like Coruscant. Coruscant was not, I forgot what Lucas originally called the main planet, but Coruscant was a Timothy Zahn name. That was what.
Him Prime?
No. You're thinking Sequel Trilogy. That's what the Sequel Trilogy thing was. No, it was.
All right, yeah, that was, yeah.
It was something different that he was going to call it. I forgot what it was, but whatever it was, he ended up using Timothy Zahn's Coruscant name for the main planet. So I mean, he really made a lot of concessions. And brought in a lot of expanded universe stuff, some minor, some major. And that was basically to acknowledge it's kind of like as a gift to the fans. And so then what happened after the sequel or the prequel trilogy was made, then what he began doing is there would be certain things that he would canonize and then certain things he wouldn't. So a lot of interviews that he did throughout the 2000s were, hey, this story, is done. Is it canon? And a lot of times he would give the same answer. Well, if it didn't come from me and all this other stuff, it's not canon. But then sometimes if he thought a particular concept was cool, then he might say, yeah, all right, that's fine. We can officially make that. I mean, he would just make these off-the-cuff remarks based on questions that he was answered. But, of course, the fan base latched onto it. Hey, Lucas said this is canon now. But his general thought process was, if he took something from the expanded universe and put it in his own creation, that's what canonized it.
Mm-hmm.
And other than that, he didn't even care. He had no interest in the expanded universe, never read a single book from it. Beyond licensing it and giving his permission, didn't even care. Wasn't even interested. If people liked it better than his stuff, he didn't care about that either. You know, and he was basically, people would say, well, is the Zahn trilogy canon? He's like, until I make my own 7, 8, and 9, you guys can think whatever you want. If you want to, if in your mind these stories are canon, then they are to you. But they're not to me. And that was the frustrating thing. That's the reason why when he sold it to Disney, that's when everybody got excited, because everybody started thinking, well, wait a minute. You know, they're not going to have that same, because if you think about it from a Disney perspective, when you're buying the whole property, you're buying the expanded universe as well. So everybody thought, look, you've got this whole plethora of stories that you can already make into movies. You don't even have to do any work. You just, hey, there's a book that's popular. Let's do that. And that's why everybody thought, you got the Thrawn trilogy. You had this thing laid out. You know, I mean, there were some things that were maybe a little carried away and ridiculous about that trilogy, as well as some of the other books. But you can fix that. Use that as your template. Now, what Disney did, which at the time disappointed me as a fan, particularly since I was really into the expanded universe, when they nullified it and said, yeah, expanded universe is now called Legends and it doesn't even count anymore. You know, you heard, you know, what's the line? 1,000 voices suddenly cried out. And you know, that's like that whole like Yoda scene on Kashyyyk, you know, when he felt all those deaths. That's kind of what we were all like. That was kind of our reaction. In fact, I think that was a meme going around for a while. But then they basically quickly made up for that when they said, oh, by the way, we're going to start writing a new set of books, new set of comics, new set of everything, and it's all going to be canonized. You're never going to have to worry about, oh, this really great story that you love so much doesn't actually count, because it does. So that's when everybody went, well, okay, that's fine. And that makes sense from a marketing perspective, too, because Disney wanted to be able to control the stories. If they brought in the old expanded universe and canonized that, they would have been painting themselves into this unbelievable corner immediately. In fact, that's what kind of happened with the expanded universe with the Yuuzhan Vong series, which is like 22 books long or something, is that afterwards, the universe was in such a complete disarray that it was really hard to go back and tell all those feel-good Star Wars stories that you're so used to, because the universe is crap. It had been just unrecognizable. It had been changed to such a heavy degree that while it was kind of cool and somewhat realistic, it was really hard to go back and tell any kind of a story unless you told it, hey, this takes place before the Yuuzhan Vong came around. You know, so, but again, now you'd be as trapped as you are now with, you know, some of the films. And so that's why they did it that way. But I would love to see if they would do maybe like the alternate universe type things, right? Where they actually do make an animated series out of some of this stuff, just so we have it. I mean, I wouldn't have even minded if they took the Duel of the Fates movie that Colin Trevorrow was going to do and make an animated film on that. But
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of books that could be turned into, like, you know, those type of movies, like those DC, like graphic novel almost style type.
Exactly. Yeah, like The Long Halloween or something like that, which the new Batman
Hush
film
or
is
something like
kind
that.
of based on that.
Is it that and Hush? Hush, it has especially the Riddler. Like, he totally looks like what actually was the Riddler in that movie, in that story. So, yeah.
I mean, it just depends on, you know, what they want to do, how far they want to go with it. I mean, I think that ultimately they could do some things with this that I think would be actually healthy for Disney Plus. I'm talking about the future just of the channel, right? I mean, and I'm not counting the other things because I know Disney Plus has a ton of other stuff on it. I mean, besides the Marvel stuff, you have other original content that's made for it. You have, of course, that's where all the Disney franchise or like the whole
movies,
library sits basically, right? But where Star Wars is concerned, though, you could actually start to do some interesting things with it that I think would satisfy a lot of fans, and it really wouldn't confuse the casual fans because they're not going to necessarily look for it. I mean, if it's another little thumbnail on Disney Plus, who cares? Now, yeah, you go market that as like some big film. Okay, now you're going to have a problem because, now people are going to be like, wait, is this episode 10? I mean, you're going to get that kind of thing. Remember what happened with the whole Rogue One and all that? People are like, wait, is this episode 8? No, it's Rogue One. But
right.
We just had episode 7. So where's Luke Skywalker? Yeah, this is actually episode 3.5. Whoa.
Exactly.
But wait, but next year episode 8's coming out? Yes.
Yes.
So you saw episode 7. Now you're going to see episode 3.5, then episode 8. Then you're going to see episode 3.25 because that actually takes place before Rogue One.
Right.
I mean, it does get a little bit convoluted. And when you're not, and this is where, in my opinion, Disney kind of dropped the ball. They really didn't market that stuff as, it's not so much that they didn't market the actual movies well. They didn't really market as a franchise very well. Yeah, it's like they weren't really clear in a lot of ways. Now, of course, again, it's kind of a slippery slope because you have to think of, well, who is your audience really? Are you really trying to make this for the casual fans? Are you trying to make this for the hardcore fans? Are you trying to serve too many masters, as it were, by trying to make it for everybody? In which case, nobody's going to be happy. You know what I mean? It's like, you got to strike a balance somewhere. Where have I heard that before?
Either Cobra Kai or Star Wars.
But again, though, with the whole DCEU and same thing, well, I won't say that because they've had, they've had some failures though, where, I mean, they were almost done, right?
Started on that, man.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So maybe they're not the best example, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe certainly is, and they don't necessarily. They just expect people to catch up to them. They're not trying to dumb anything down for anybody. They're not trying to, it's like, look, we have all these properties. If you're interested in it, then you're going to find out about it. You have this magical thing called the internet now. If you don't know what something is, you can Google it. That's the thing that kills me even about Star Wars. And look, I've had to do it. I mean, there's been a lot of times where, we were going to, especially because we'll do a show on some topic, and, it's kind of like, well, I don't know if I remember all this stuff. Like, there's one time where we were doing some show that I remember we were going to feature some Sith Lords or something, and I'm like, well, I know there's like a gang of Sith Lords, but I don't remember them all. And that's when you start, looking up like Darth Nihilist and, all these other guys, and you're like, I don't even know who these people are. But the point is, I can go on StarWars.com, go to the data bank, and find out everything I need to find out about this character if I'm really that curious. And to be honest, this is where I fault a lot of these so-called casual fans. It's like, look, you don't really need to make movies or TV shows for a casual fan. Make them for your hardcore fans. Everybody will catch up. Just release the movie, with a little explanation. I mean, even Dune was successful, and nobody understands that series. But they finally did it in a way that, hey, I can follow the story. When I saw the new Dune, I'm like, finally, I actually know what this stupid thing's about. Now, granted, they didn't actually do a full movie or I should say a movie on the full book like the 84 one was. They actually did the smart thing. They broke it up into 2 sections. So the first movie is really the first half of the book. The next movie which I think was greenlit, will then deal with the conclusion of the book. And there's multiple books in that series. But people just, you have to catch up, and especially when you have a franchise that's been around as long as Star Wars has been around, you have to make some allowances for the fact of, hey, let's make some content for the hardcore fans.
Day ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the Heir to the Empire thing, no matter where anybody lands on it, whether people think, and again, I'm one of those people that would love to see it tie together the Mandoverse. Since Disney and Lucasfilm has taken the time to create this micro universe within the franchise that's dealing with this time period, and if they want to make a film that actually neatly ties up a story arc that's occurring over multiple series, well, okay, that makes sense. And if you want to use Heir to the Empire and loosely adapt that into a film to do that, I'm all for it. On the other hand, if you're like, hey, this is popular and people would kind of dig this, let's go ahead and make an animated Heir to the Empire film, I'm for that too. As for everybody else, they'll catch up or they won't. You know, I can't count the number of times. I don't know, have you watched the Marvel TV shows yet?
Mm-mm.
So, you know, you have like WandaVision, you have Falcon and Winter Soldier, you got Loki, and you have Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Now, I liked all of them to varying degrees. But I honestly really strongly liked all the series. I thought they were really good. And in fact, some of them I even like better than the films because it can really get into the stories more. But the thing is, if you actually look at the reviews of those shows, especially on YouTube channels, there's some that people like pretty much everybody loved WandaVision.
Mm-hmm.
Falcon and Winter Soldier, people were okay with it. Got a little bit preachy, a little social justice warrior that was just annoying and took you out of it at times. Loki, most people liked it. Some people didn't like it. That was a polarizing one. And then Hawkeye was another one that was sort of polarizing. I loved it. Actually, I think it was one of my favorite ones. But there's a lot of people that, you know, really weren't that into it, or they were kind of lukewarm on it, or they liked certain episodes, but there were some that they didn't like. So overall, they're like, it was okay. Hopefully the next season's better. But the point is, it's like, that's how people are going to do it, right? I mean, you just say, okay, can't we just get to the point where we do that? It's the same thing with music. It's sort of like, say you have an artist that's put out like 15 albums or something. Okay. So they put out number 16. Maybe you don't like it. All right, well, fine. Wait till number 17. Maybe you'll like that one. But instead, a lot of times people they get up in arms if they don't like every single thing, you know? And it's like, with Star Wars, you have to understand the franchise is old enough now that you have to let people like what they like and don't like. Right, exactly. You got to let them find their way. And you have to, as a company like Disney, like Lucasfilm, make these things for everybody. Just understand that not everybody is going to love everything that you put out. And stop trying to put out stuff that everybody is going to love, because then you're going to end up with something nobody loves. So hopefully that's what happens. That's hopefully that, you know, I don't know if they're ultimately going to do Heir to the Empire or not. Like I said, this was a report that's been picked up by a lot of sites. The sources claim inside information. Take that how you will. You know, inside information could be a lot. And it could be something as simple as, hey, look, they got the green light to put this thing in development where, yeah, go develop a treatment or something and we'll take a look at it. Or it could be something that Disney is secretly planning to do. We don't know. But it's definitely worthy of our discussion and our note, though. I mean, you put something out there like inside sources say Heir to the Empire is going to be the first Disney Plus film. you can bet we're going to talk about it, especially being fans of that book like we are. But whether they do it or not, I don't know. But the important thing isn't what we think, it's what you guys think. So, what do you think? Do you think they're going to make Heir to the Empire into a live action or animated film? Or do you think it's just a ugly rumor that got started by some overzealous content creator? Let us know in the comment section. And while you're there, let us know which you would prefer. Would you prefer a live action version or an animated version? Whether it's a straight adaptation or a loose adaptation with some of the new characters to whom we've already been introduced. So, I don't know. What are your final thoughts on this?
Final thoughts. I probably would like to see the live action version of it, just because I think this story has a lot of weight to it, and so I really would like to see that really come across in some really good acting. But yeah, I mean, I hope they do it. I mean, and like I said, just make it make sense. That's always my thing. Is make sure you have a good story. And
I was about to say that. You always say either make it make sense or make sure it has a good story. But you're not. I mean, that's basically what it comes down to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm probably gonna pretty much agree on that one. I think if I had to choose, I would probably rather have a live action one. The only way that I struggle with that a little bit is I do like the idea of an animated version with Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Billy D. Williams, all those guys doing the voices. To me, that would give me
cool,
the continuity.
That and the action can be limitless because you don't have to worry about the physicality part. You can have them really do some cool stuff. But yeah, it's just something about that, especially like you said, it would be weird going from live action Mandalorian, Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and then you got an animated movie. It's kind of like
well, now see, that's where I'm drawing the line, though. When I say an animated thing, I mean a straight up adaptation. So it's not tying together the Mandoverse. Because absolutely, if you're using this as a loose adaptation and you're tying up the Mandoverse in any way, it has to be live action. Yeah, you're right. That would be really, really weird.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't know. It's like, I mean, I would kind of like it maybe in a way, but it would just be, I don't know, that would just be a little strange. On the other hand, though, we've already seen that. You start the Clone Wars with Attack of the Clones, then the entire Clone Wars is animated, then you come back to live action with Revenge of the Sith. So if you look at it from that standpoint, they've already done that, and we've been fine with it.
True.
So, but that's telling an entire middle section of a story. You're not concluding everything. So, we'll have to see. But we'll keep an eye on this for you guys. We'll naturally, if anything else comes up, or if this thing gets substantiated in any way, if there's any progress, you can bet that we're going to talk about it. And it'll more than likely be on a Friday show, because that would definitely be newsworthy stuff. So don't forget, while you're here, definitely hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification bell so you guys know when we're coming out with new content. We definitely stream live, for the most part, every Monday and Friday at 8. If we're not able to stream live, we'll have a pre-recorded program in place, so you always have something to watch if you watch us Monday and Friday at 8 o'clock. And this Monday, we're going to be doing the Obi-Wan trailer reaction. That's right, a new trailer has finally dropped for the Obi-Wan series, and it's a pretty big one, and it's got a lot of stuff that we can, talk about something else where we have a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack in that one, too. So, until then, till Monday at 8, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time. May the Force be with you, always.